Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Alec Foundation, for putting together these thoughtful conversations on culture, on craft, on art, all conversations that really need, a voice that needs to be heard and reheard. So I don't think any of my panelists really need too much of an introduction. Most people know them, and there's huge fan following for Bappa's work, for Jahnavi's and Sonam's. Sonam being a very close, good friend of mine. He did not even want to go through the questions with me. So let's just talk about the fact that when did fashion really become a performance? I'm going to start with you, Sonam. That your work resists, performance. And so you work with recycled memory, Ahimsa Silk, remnants, cultural crossings. So from where you stand, what break, if fashion continues to treat sustainability as an option? I mean, can you just divorce the two? You can't. So tell me a little bit about what do you think of fashion as only performance?
Can you hear me? No? Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right that my work works on sustainability and the ecological factors that are put into the show. But so far as fashion is concerned, you must remember that it is theatrical. It is dramatic. So for our shows, we work with the concept literally of theater so that it's interesting, it's captivating, and the models also with their makeup and everything adds a special buoyancy. And if you see, there are designers in the world like John Galliano or Alexander McQueen who even take it even further, where it looks like operatic, literally. Because it's always about captivating audience to enable people to have an aspiration. It's not that clothing has to be, clothing doesn't have to be an installation. It has to be real per se. So when you break down an outfit or a collection from somebody like Jopo Gautier, it's very wearable, except that on the stage, it always looks dramatic, and that's the way you do it. The fact of the matter, there are many designers, which is also internationally, we have Vivienne Westwood, who also works with things like sustainability, cross-culture, linkages, historical root, memory, and various factors which I have educated myself to understand and percolated into my work. Because the truth of the matter is we come from a country with extreme amount of treasure trove of textiles, craft-made, colors, sensibility, and people, and they're all influencing our work at some point. The fact of the matter is, if you only stick to one story, you leave out an entire lot. So it's very important for us to understand that each one of us brings something special to the table. And at the same level, being in tune with the world and the earth today, I think it's, for me personally, it's more my Buddhist upbringing of understanding the element of compassion, of understanding that textiles have a story. It also links people together, whether it's the craftspeople you're working with, but also the consumer at the end of the day, which is very important. And that's why, apart from my glamorous line, which I do for fashion and sell all over the world, I also work with craft organizations, support different organizations to work together, because we all are part of the whole story.
So, my next question would be with you, Bappa. Textiles don't perform, they endure. So, in the current fashion system, when do you think it's even, compatible with this entire logic of handloom? Because, handloom is expensive. And, this is a huge dichotomy because people want to, be fashionable, they want to support, but then there is a price that you need to pay. So, do you think they both, they can endure this entire new narrative that's being, spoken about? And I think it's great at a certain level, but at a certain level, it also stops many people from enjoying craft.
I mean, when you say expensive, it is a, I don't know, because in India, handloom today is still sold very cheap. And in an age where you go to a Inox theater and buy popcorns for 500 rupees, you can buy handlooms for 300 rupees, 500 rupees, 800 rupees. So I really don't know when you say handloom is expensive. Yes, handloom has various categories depending on the skill level of the weaver. So a very high skilled, and unfortunately in India when we talk about handlooms, we only talk about a very high bracket of, say, Banarasis, Kanjivarams, Pathanis. But we forget that the spine of handloom is actually the semi-skilled and the non-skilled handloom weavers who are sitting day and night and just weaving plain cloth. Matha shari, which we say in Bengal. So, yeah, I mean, handloom today can still clothe everybody, I feel.
So, coming to you, Janabi, your work begins with women weavers. And so not buyers, So what really gets erased, when fashion is reduced only to spectacle? Especially, for regions like the Northeast, because it's only now that there's been a resurgence. And I come from Shillong, and, I have this huge connection for Muga, for Ahimsa silk, for all of those materials that I grew up with. So tell me a little bit about, how you engage with women weavers and, when has, do you think that it's really been reduced to a spectacle?
That's a very interesting question, Mohua, because yes, the time for the Northeast has finally come.
Yes.
Finally, the spotlight is on us, but we mustn't forget the context, because these are a very different part of the country, very different materials to play with, very different sea of motives to play with. But the context, where does it come from? Where does it originate? So that is something we need to give back. And that is how I think I got into this line that, hey, this is such a beautiful part of our legacy, but it's being, it's not being given the justice it should be. It's not, the women are not being given the recognition they ought to have. So that's how I feel very passionate about this. And that's how I got into this, that fashion cannot be a fad. And fashion, if it come in and it's time for the Northeast, please remember the context. Please remember the people behind it, the history, the culture, the legacy, the materials of our people.
Thank you so much. It just feels like a personal win when you say that it's time for the Northeast. So, Sonam, I'm going to also ask you about material. It always has memory. Now when I look back at my grandmother had gifted me a Gorod shari. And it's still very stiff and it's there. And that shari is a reminder of my grandmother, my Dida, my mother's mother. And, in Bengal, widows don't wear color. So they have a very plain colored sari, which has got like a green border or a blue or a black. And red is just not allowed, So let's talk about material intelligence, so which is a phrase that we rarely hear, in Fashion Week. So tell me a little bit about that. You work with recycled saris, as you had mentioned, block prints, zero waste patchwork. And I have so many of your patchwork, designs. And I've got complimented every time that I've worn that. So, is working with material also a way of working with time and memory for you, Sonam?
See, personally, I think you're absolutely right, because fabric, textile has memory like most of nature. Like when you look at a tree and you cut a tree down, you can see the rings of the tree,
Yes.
It's very similar to textile. It's got stories which is emotional, which, like you said, is passed down from your grandmother. But I think what's interesting when I look at things more pan-India, and the fact of the matter is everybody has this. Somebody may have a skirt, somebody may have a choli, somebody may have a sari, but all over India, we have this, which also links to, for example, jewelry, which is passed down through centuries.
Yes.
The sad part is today we have very little ethos or even love for things that are old. And there are only, like, you're literally seeing 3 to 7 people here who try to bring it back into vogue, per se. I have always believed that anything that is traditional has also a very strong stamp of fashion. And all over the world, if you really look at the worldscape, it's always interesting how a lot of it keeps coming back, And the old never disappears, because the old has a grandeur, whether it's the royalty or it's anything. It could be just a little piece of fabric, And that's why the story of my recycle came in, because it was the ethos of trying to capture your root into the modernity of today's relevance, where things change, but you have to keep going back to the past to get to the future, because you can't leave people behind. And that's where life, begins, actually.
Yeah, you can never ignore the past. I mean, the past is what brings us, all of us here. So, Bappa, you work with one of my favorite forms Jamdani. For me, that is memory, that is my mother, my grandmother, my pishi, my mashi, and also indigo, which happens to be very much a part of the Bengal story, right? And chins. So materials that carry geography and history, So what does a fabric know that often a designer may not know? And they must listen to it probably.
Well, I've always walked to the opposite side. I've not used traditional materials to talk my design aesthetics when it comes to my product. If you saw my saris, what I'm more attached to the memory is of the skill rather than the material. And when I say skill, my focus immediately goes to the person or the community, the human aspect behind it. The reason why we started our label Bailu in 2000 was because I went to this village and I saw they were in a Jamdani village and they were dismantling the looms and they were selling it off as firewood. So that moved me in a sense where I thought that this person with generations of legacy, of knowledge, of weaving, of memory of his forefathers, just weaving that particular Jamdani sari, will get lost if one generation doesn't come and weave. And weaving is not taught to us in schools. It's not a degree that we get. It's always passed on from the father to the son or the daughter. So my work started, pivoted around that aspect of human preservation of the human memory, preservation of the human skill. And I'm not much of a supporter of traditional materials as such, but I do believe in natural materials. Like in my work, I would never use a synthetic fiber. I would only use natural fibers like wool, linen, silk. I'm always looking for new alternative fibers, like it could be a banana fiber or it could be hemp or anything. So yeah, so for me, memory is the human memory rather more than of course materials do come into play, but if I talk about my personal journey, my interpreting Jamdani or interpreting skills, because one thing I'm very conscious when I work with the communities is I don't teach them any new skills because I want that skill to remain the way it is. But where I intervene as a designer point of view is through the materials. So I bring in new materials. We have brought in yarns which earlier Bengal handlooms had never seen. So, So
tell me a little about the yarns that Bengal had never seen. We'd really love to know.
Say, for instance, linen in a sari was never used. It was way back we started, using it. I think we created that concept of a sari can have a transparent pallu and an opaque body. Actually, that became to be known as a Bailu sari. Like, we would get phone calls saying, do you do Bailu saris? So it was hard for me to convince that we are Bailu. So, by changing materials, I realized that I have created a unique handwriting and in a way a new genre of textiles in Bengal handlooms which went beyond us rather, and which I'm happy about, that to get to see, to be able to create a new genre in your lifetime, I think it's special.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely extremely special. So Jahnavi, Lahe means slow. And it's such a beautiful word in a market that, we are all consumed, with fast fashion, fast food, everything is fast. And slow is really losing its context and it's often looked at as being backward, but it is intelligent. And it took me very long to really realize that, the slow life that my grandmother, my mother, that they led is the life that I'm really wanting to go back to now. So tell me a little bit about Lahe.
for that, Mahua. When you thought about Lahe, it was really the essence of the Homia, I think the Assamese, slow but sustainable. And that is really how everyone lived, our forefathers. And when I got into this line, I was into the handloom sector, quite stumbled into it rather. Same thing like what Baba mentioned. I just come in as the chapter chair of FICCI Flow, Northeast chapter. And our agenda was work with women's livelihoods, for women's issues. So and the center told us that, okay, female feticide. I said, wait a minute, in the Northeast we don't have that issue. Well, what is our issue? And I looked around, it really was human trafficking.
Yes.
And our women, we have the largest percentage of women weavers in the country. But then, because poverty forced them out of the regions. So they went to a shelter home for NGOs. There were a lot of looms and a lot of women, but nobody was weaving. They didn't know how to, they'd lost their art. So then Central Silk Board came in. They helped me with the female, textile weaver who stayed in the home. So batches of women were going out rehabilitated. And that was really a turning point in my life, and how I started working with more and more women, giving them better materials to work. And then it's slow is fine, because what we do now with slow fashion, that's how Lahe came in, teaching new weavers about the new materials. As you know, they only did, everything was generic. It was Assam pat, Assam silk.
Yeah.
That could mean anything. Assam silk with polyester, Assam silk with that zari, that was all only Assam silk. But when you ask them that do Assam with Eri, they were very hesitant in the beginning. They've not done it. It keeps staring. It's fine. So like now Mulberry silk with Eri, first they would resist. But the weavers I got together, we could do. And then the market also responded to it. And then the natural dye Eri on Mulberry, or natural dye, Eri on Muga. There were so many things you could play with. I mean, I'm no trendsetter, but I think I did what I thought was how we could bring back our own beautiful, vocabulary into different forms, art forms, and be slow about it. But hopefully we're on the right track, and hopefully we're keeping that history alive.
I would
Papa
like
would
to
like to
add,
say
with her, is that when I had the opportunity of the FICCI that she was meant to, they had appointed me to initially go around and help design. And what I really beautifully realized, that while the entire India we were clamoring for markets and we were clamoring to sell, Bengal weavers are very, very commercial. They want to make and sell. That's it. They are only interested in selling. Whereas when I went there, it was a complete different picture, because they were weaving for themselves.
Yeah.
And that I felt was really pulling you back in, centering yourself back again as to the purpose of textile. And that I think was, although we didn't manage to weave anything out of the project, but I learned that textiles, when you're really creating something, when you're passionately creating something, it doesn't matter if it sells or not, because they were just weaving for themselves, and we were actually coming from outside telling them, no, you have to produce more because I need to go and sell. They don't care. That was the beauty of, I think that's exactly what Lahe.
That's exactly what Lahe was.
I understood what Lahe was.
How fantastic is that? It's a beautiful world where you do it for yourself, and because it's a tradition that's passed on. I'm going to continue with you, Jahnavi. Fashion, we rarely talk about labor in fashion, right? Unless something really goes wrong. Like how Bappa was talking about the looms that have shut. I was just recently at the Kochi Biennale, and I was seeing this film where, there were so many laborers, they become laborers now, many weavers across India. And, they're like doing buildings, they're standing on, they're creating things that they were not born into, they were weavers, and their looms have shut. So, you work with women, who weave between agriculture, caregiving and survival. So what does fashion really owe the hands that make it? Because there is such a mismatch between the two. So tell me a little bit about that.
I think so. That is why I sort of emphasized on that slow fashion. It has to be that. I have to give my woman, I can't give them timelines. They will come and they'll go, they'll sit on their loom, they won't sit on their loom. But we have to just manage with different batches. But when they all go in the agriculture time, plucking time, we have to let sowing time, we have to let them go. But that's why I'm saying we're not hugely, aggressive marketeers, but our products are there. So I really can't stick to a timeline about winter fashion, summer season, this and that. But I know that in Assam, since we work along with the climate, the cooler climate, when people ask us, why don't we do cottons? Well, cottons don't even grow in my region. Why do I need to do that? We are silks. And that is really used around the year. When it's a little cooler, I would wear my airy. Today, when it's winter, I'm really living on my airy. So those are the silks. So we don't do any like contemporary seasonal fashion trends. It's just there. And
Yes.
yeah, at the most, it'll be the wedding season, which I abhor. I can't do things like that, So then I add that zari and all that for them. But that is very interesting. So it's seasonal and people will come around at that time. But you all will know better. So please.
So, I did a massive consultancy with Royal Enfield in 2023. And I have always been somebody who has literally brought in the Northeast into the fashionscape, And I started with my whole prevalence of Eri silk from a very different area because being partly Tibetan, the Buddhist Eri, the lamas, what they wear, the red shawl, is actually supposed to be Ahimsa silk because it's burgundy maroon and it is Eri silk. So that was where my story began, And interestingly, going back to the legend, it was about how from the Tibetan side, we believe that the cocoons were never made in Assam, it was made in China, and how the monks got them within their robes, and that's how it continued. Those are the stories, the legends that one has heard, So anyway, going back to her story, so they asked me to come and work with them. And it was very fascinating because I went into Bongaigaon and I was working with Action Northeast Trust. And like she said, first thing is all the weavers were women. And it's a big different story because when you go to the south, I work in Pondicherry too. And all they're men, most of them. Bengali to manush na hai tai. So the thing was, Assamese was all women. So it was fascinating, first of all, to see the women. And like, again, Bappa said, they seem to be so comfortable in themselves, whatever. So I was foxed because, when you created things, you had to recreate things vis-a-vis that whole scape. The thought process that they were willing to do. So, but luckily I had Norman dye and he had fabulous vegetable dyes, So I had to intuitively redesign things immediately, literally changing my designs, actually working with them in the center,
I think this point is very important, working with them.
Yeah.
Rather than when we come from the cities, we always
Yeah.
think that they will have to do things what we say them. But I think you rightly pointed out, even I have applied it in my work, is we have to work with their lifestyle, their space and everything.
No, and I think what, the point that I think Bappa said initially about his weaving and loom, I think his traditional practice is the fact that he's doing the loom. His modernity and his fashion consciousness, which probably he's not, he's not understood yet, or he knows, is that the fashion consciousness is about actually working with very interesting textiles that he blends in between. Hai na?
Yeah, which is so interesting,
Yeah.
So, Sonam, I'll continue with you. Your garments travel to Paris, New York, Vancouver. So how do you ensure that the stories of the hands behind them really they don't disappear? And once the garment enters a luxury space, because I've traveled internationally and I've found beautiful embroidery done on these international brands, and nobody would even know that some of this work is from India. And I just run towards that garment because I love textiles from India. I've been writing passionately about it, and I bleed when I see that weavers are actually giving up their work because of lack of funds. So tell me a little bit about this.
So, this is a very, very big conversation. You're absolutely right. Because in the 90s, I lived in Paris for a while. And then I saw that most of the manufacture was done in India. At that time, even worse, because it was all labor trade. And there was, intense work which was done for Coco Chanel and whatever. And we didn't even know what it was. Then slowly, as fashion started coming, education, we all grew up. And then we started realizing a lot of it was actually produced in India. Now, the third phase is that slowly by slowly, designers started reaching out. And many of us started showing our work internationally, and there was one of the leaders of that is Manish Arora. And what they did was actually took identity with them. So when they showed the embroideries, then slowly people started realizing that, that embroidery comes from India, But yet what you have to remember is that the entire fashion scape is controlled by the white man. It's really an awareness that today you get a massive, you get a massive hit with Trump in it, And the fashion world has always been like that. It's a very simple saying that when you start seeing literally more Indian girls in the international ramps, then you know fashion is also changing. It's all linked. So with the rise of, like, I was there when Aishwarya became Miss World, no? And she became a star, whatever. But we were all a part of the bandwagon. We all knew each other. We were all friends. We also saw how people rose. But at the same time, I also understood my own identity while working with my work. And like you correctly said, I think there is much more awareness today. There are a lot of Indian brands. They're slowly percolating into the international world. For example, Pero, Injury, or, bits of Bappa maybe, bits of myself. We've been showing all over the world. It's a kind of an education to the West to realize that we are not just in a manufacturing country. My whole story behind my work is to tell the international world that we are a creative country. We are not China.
But, Sonam, I'm going to ask you here. Pero is totally unaffordable, for the
of course,
Indian
yeah.
consumer. And, you love the work that they do. And then, this is for all of you, actually. I'd love to hear this, about the Kolhapuri scandal.
Story.
Let's
Yes,
talk
yes.
about that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
call
yeah.
it a scandal
Yeah.
for Prada to take it there. And suddenly somebody noticed that it was on the runway. And these things keep happening,
So it's,
yeah.
it's the story of also this...
Does the fashion fraternity come together when this sort of thing happens?
Well, it doesn't necessarily all come together. But the fact of the matter, there's much more sensitive and awareness than it was before. I don't know if you know, but earlier there were these cases where a lot of international designers were picking up stories from South America, for example. They would take big influences from Peru and Chile and Africa, and nobody would be there to say anything. But today, what's interesting is that the moment they wore the chaplis in Christian Dior,
that was amazing.
it
How
was
they
amazing.
brought them down.
Down. And today, all the things, even, digital printing of block prints, all these things are slowly now people are realizing it's inappropriate. It's afforestation, because you're just plucking up from... And the thing is that at least there is a sense of identity. And I think it's just not Indian designers. It's Indian fashion, Indian films. Everything is connected. One story that I have is that, we're all interdependent to each other.
Absolutely.
This is a body it's a world that we're slowly a part of. We are a big part of that world, and we're all growing together.
I have a story to add to your question to him about... So I used to work in an export firm where we used to do embroideries for very high-end companies like Kenzo and Armani. And if you are into exports, you work 2 years in advance before the season. So I had finished a season, and I had left my job, and then I started Bailu, and apparently I was in Paris with my wife. We were moving around, and in Paris, Kenzo's, so it was after 2 years. So we were walking past Kenzo's showroom, and my embroidery was exactly there. And I was like, oh my God, this is what we did 2 years back. And I wanted to go in and see, and I was not allowed to enter because of my skin. So these prejudices are there.
So, Bappa, do you think that there is danger, about craft itself that's becoming very aestheticized, beautiful, but really detached, from the reality of the place it comes from?
Yeah, I have seen it myself through my export experience with the export firm where we were doing, I still remember in one small Karigar's home, we were doing Armani's embroidered bags. It was just a sequin embroidery. And the precision was such that the circle had to be just a perfect circle. Any one bead went here and there would be rejected. So we were there throughout the night, looking into the frames and doing all of that. And which made me wonder at that point in time, the Armani, the designers is sitting there, doesn't even have a clue where and what is going into making that particular bag, and that will come into a season and then it'll go into a discounted pile. And so there is a frivolous aspect to it, but that is the market. Whereas in India, I think when fashion wasn't following the Western fashion trend, what it was earlier, and I think what we are all trying to go back to at the moment is that things were made, very classic pieces were made, and things were acquired not for a particular fashion trend. It was acquired to use, to keep back, and to pass it on. So I think we are going back there.
Oh, yeah, we are. Absolutely, we are. Would you like to say something, Jahnavi?
I think that is absolutely the way we will be going back to, and that, for instance, it takes the world to notice the airy silk only when Mardani wore that airy tie, and suddenly everyone's talking about Ahimsa silk again. So those are the important. Some celebrity wearing gives a flip.
No, I feel Airy, you started Airy working with Airy. He started Airy long time back, yeah.
Yes,
Even when
but only that.
Airy didn't come into the fashion
That's
trend
what I'm
at all.
saying. It's only when Mardani wore it that people are talking about it. So that's ironical, because it's always been there. But then the other things are we want the properties of these materials to go forward and people to appreciate the context where it comes from. Also the fact that I believe in the world there are the 5 silks which are commercially produced. Assam is the home for 4 of them, except the 5th. So I don't know about the China bit, but at least in Assam was home where, and the Muga, as you know, has the GI status on it. So it doesn't go anywhere else in the world. So that's what I wanted to, bring to light here.
And it's absolutely like food, like exactly the earlier panel that they were talking about food. It's exactly the same.
Yes. And if we can give credit to the regions that they come from, it's just acknowledged. Now, there was a small instance about the Northeast, I'll tell you, where this particular fashion brand spoke about all the weaves of the Northeast and, spoke some right, some wrong, but then they gave their opinions, but it was all embroidered and wasn't even made in the Northeast. So you can't do that. I think there was a sound objection that went out, but from our team, the only rejoinder that came was that we are sorry to have hurt the sentiments. It's not a question of hurting our sentiment. It's like, set the record straight. That is something we
but I
emphasized
think
on.
what I was trying to say with what Bappa was saying as well as Janvi was saying was answering actually your first question, is that's where fashion comes in. You see, because at the end of the day, that when you can take the textile into a fashion gamut, it's interesting for the young. It's today with social media, everybody interested. When they see that one person, like she just said, when Mandani was wearing the airy silk thing that everybody introduced. So something about it is related to the media exchange, something is related to the effervescent. And literally to something which is not necessarily tangible. That's where the tangible becomes intangible, And it's fascinating how everything is connected to each other. And that is what drew me to fashion.
So Sonam, you just rightly pointed out about social media, right? So do you really think that digital platforms really are a threat, or are they a translator? Especially how do you translate depth? How do you, talk about the whole process in a, 59-second reel, without diluting the meaning behind it?
I think, literally borrowing from 2 different conversations. I think what Leila said yesterday, that social media is not just the devil itself. It is a tool to be able to use for your benefit,
Absolutely.
You cannot
I agree
use it.
with that.
You can't use an
Completely
hour of it
agree.
to talk about your work. You have the 10 minutes to be able to, for people to capture their attention. And the saddest thing, and I was in a conversation with somebody who creates these social media reels, etc. And she was saying that the literally people's attentions are getting smaller and smaller. From 15 seconds has become 10, which is getting 5. And that puts us against the wall, because how are we supposed to show our work? But then also creatively, you have to find that one thing that would maybe catch the attention of things,
Yeah, I'm constantly bombarded with that my podcast needs to become smaller and smaller and smaller. And I said, I cannot go beyond this, because this is a conversation with somebody, with their work, with their art. How can you finish it in 10 minutes, So, Bappa, do you think that social media is really helping handloom survive or forcing it to perform differently? Let's talk about performance here.
Well, I'm horrible with social media, and but anyway, we see the effect. We see the effect that it's having. It is a double-edged saw, I would say. There are benefits, there are advantages, disadvantages. I think we are not yet ready. Like people like us who are a bit old school and who have not been updated with the technology, which we have not felt any need to be updated about, we are struggling. But people who are like for instance, my daughter's generation, they are so fluid. They are so fluid. So it's what I believe what you said, that it is the language that we need to learn about social media, and social media has definitely much wider reach. Earlier, say for instance, if I did something, I would have to get in touch with a fashion magazine or so it's more
respond.
independent now. If you can build up your followers, genuine followers, then you reach out to them. So I believe it gives you, it's more democratic
Definitely.
in a way.
Yes, absolutely. So, Jahnavi, do you really think that digital platforms have also opened up the global markets, and people can like really get in touch with you and you can make connections, and also the other flip side is this, that I often think about the risk of being disconnected, from the craft, from the local ecosystem. But here there is this whole global market that everybody, like, you mentioned about Peru being successful, but they do globally very well. So do you think that digital platform is good, with the global market?
So, like he said, it's a double-edged sword. But yes, we are reaching out to newer markets if you are good at it. Now, we are also very challenged with our social media. But whoever does find us, they continue, And I think that we must never forget that in the reel, we don't just talk about products. We talk about the life, because for us in Lahey Looms, it was all about the women and the thing they've created and the new skills that they've learned, working on newer materials, more difficult materials to weave on, and getting that creative joy, satisfaction, the economic empowerment in their very hands, and reviving an old Assamese vocabulary which was lost. Trying to get out of the Hualkusi mold, because even now people want to visit Hualkusi. But there are so many other different things going on. And so that, I think, if we get our stories right, and for me, the weavers are always the focus, and that their lives are so, a part of the life, the rhythm, and the way we've addressed this issue, there is still a demand for it. People are accepting it. And there is a reach if we can capture it better. We need to master the social media.
Absolutely. There is
We
no
need to
choice.
master
there.
My painting journey success is totally social media.
I know, I've been following, and it's
when I was
unbelievable.
painting, I was just doing swatches and I was just painting and I was just putting it up on Instagram, and suddenly someone from Australia saw it and she offered me, would you like to do an artist in, I mean, not a residency, but a collaboration, because it was COVID and we were not allowed to travel. So that was my first collaboration, and then it just went on from one
I
to
just
the
love
other.
what you said just now, Papa, because for me also my entire rebooting has been courtesy social media. And
And taking actually both of your conversations forward, I think, the big lesson that we all learned, which is we haven't learned yet, is the COVID period, you see, because we were thrown into our rooms alone and we had to work on creative ideas. And probably your podcast is then when it really rose, like you just said. You see, that period was very essential for creative digital work. Because suddenly we were stuck, we couldn't go out, and suddenly the shops are not relevant anymore because we suddenly have social media. But I'd like to take what you said, the conversation earlier, you said where you do get, you have to be careful of what you put on social media, in the sense that if you put only your commercial stuff, then you will only be commercial. Whereas if you put a storyline, then you get global interest.
Totally, I really.
Yeah. So, Sonam, let's talk a little bit about, the ramp. Do you really think that craft sometimes gets lost, on the runway and, when it's on the ramp? Do you think craft gets lost?
No, I don't
there?
think so. I think it's very important that you must understand, like I said about theatre and about fashion, is that you need a space to be able to show it, So it can be in the form of an installation, it can be film, it can be fashion, it's all connected. The fact of the matter is, I've never looked at fashion. I mean, I grew up studying fashion and, being aware, and I even sat on a plane alone and went to Paris because I wanted to be a part of the fashion world, So I have really got in-depth understanding of what the fashion world is about. But the main thing is that, again, like social media, it's a tool. So, it depends on what your storyline is, what people can get captivated by. And if you are true to yourself, if you understand your work, you may not necessarily understand it, but other people can take it forward,
How wonderfully said, Sonam.
Yeah. And the thing
Yeah.
is that we are all connected, like I said. I don't think, one thing when I studied in fashion, we had teachers from all over the world because I was in the first batches of NIFT. And one thing they taught us that even current affairs, like what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Manipur, everything affects fashion.
Yeah, of
Absolutely,
course.
absolutely.
Everything is
everything.
interconnected. Absolutely.
From the economics to
Yeah.
It's a
the...
choice.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's a choice.
Correct. Absolutely.
So, Bapa, do you really think that, does the ramp sometimes risk flattening the surface, of making it into a surface beauty? Does it risk this entire craft that we are supposed to honor? Does it risk?
Well, yeah, I'm not from that part of the world. So for me, touching, feeling, coming close, taking time to see a textile, that's why probably I'm not very successful on social media. Is that, yeah, I belong to that and I enjoy that. And for me to buy a garment or a sari or a textile, I need to feel it, touch it, spend some time. So ramp for me, as he said in the beginning, is that theatrical thing which really attracts the person's eyeballs, and then they engage, and then they probably come close, and then they identify a style of a designer with themselves, and then so yeah. And since probably I don't do garments, I am a step back and I do textiles. So saris luckily still is bought the way I believe it to be. And yeah, so but I have a question to you about the rap. So why do people only walk ramp?
See, like again, going back to the first story, that fashion was always from the courts, and again, it's all about European and American fashion, which controls the entire business, yeah. And somehow there is an ecosystem there where it's the way models walk. It's about where it begins from, and also the envisage of getting, like, little by little, as you see, it's very fascinating because as the collections are changing in the world and relevance of Asian designers coming in, the models also are becoming Asian, which is fascinating, So there is this very subtle change that's happening in the world today. And so far as the walk is concerned, it's very interesting because it is the catwalk, and it starts, again, I said, it comes from the courts. So it was from the salons where people sat and they watched, and very wealthy women, aristocrats, just sat around and watched what they wanted to wear next. And that slowly became the catwalk for women to wear. That evolved into that. And that's the reason they have the catwalk. And it's basically to view the clothes, And actually taking your conversation forward is when I first started my fashion thing. And I brought in Northeast textiles when I bought in Airy Silk, etc. And I made it very dramatic. Literally, it was an extension of the film called The Last Emperor by Bernardo Bertolucci. And that riveted the Parisian buyers, So they all bought my collection for the store in Leclerc. And it was all because of the storyline that I just created. It was nothing to do with, And they took Airy Silk. And slowly by slowly, I started realizing this power of, storytelling.
Yeah, it
but
comes down to storytelling.
vis-a-vis creating a theatrical story, like, this thing. And little by little, that Airy Silk, as I started working with from the Northeast, promoting it in my own way, is that it started traveling the world. So once, and fascinatingly, it went to Tokyo, and we were selling in a store in Ginza. And one of the ladies came back to me saying that this textile is so old in Japan. How did you get it? And then I explained the Assam and the Northeast, and then the linkages between Asia. You see, the thing is, ultimately, we all are a part of a bigger story.
True.
So, Jahnavi, you know what? When handloom enters this entire luxury space, does it really do justice to the maker or, to the market, especially when it comes from the perspective of price?
Now, that's a tricky one for me because I'm very newcomer in this, but I do feel that handloom must get the luxury status it deserves. Materials like the Muga silk, which has a GI tag, doesn't grow anywhere in the world, has properties which will outlast you of the wearer. The Airy silk, these are, legacies that will always stay there. And so unless the market, we don't know what the market wants, that our storytelling gets better and more valuable, and then there's more respect given to the craft and the hands that weave it and the lives that it touches. And we're not doing, since I don't either do much garments either, mainly the saris, the stoles, which we started doing because of the market dictates, shorter things, unstitched apparel that one would wear and use. That I think is getting its own place at this time. The very fine sheer muga stole that I now do instead of the sari, everyone's picking up that. All our overseas clients who come. So that's there, and I think we should be able to, hopefully the market will respond. And I think that's how in our own Lahe way, I'm being able to do justice, hopefully, to where we come from and where these materials ought to be. And
Lahe is really the way forward. So Sonam, let's talk about collaborations. And we know that this is really the buzzword, and it really makes sense, I think, for especially in your work, where there are the weavers, there's the market, there is the buyer. So you've collaborated across regions, NGOs, theatre, museums, So what makes a collaboration meaningful, from your perspective, and not just extractive? What is it that brings in meaning?
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that our business is very capitalist, unfortunately, and it is also exploitative by nature, So you have to learn to be able to work with people. And like I said, there are two things I think is about being authentic about your work, and about yourself. And so I kind of look for some form of authenticity when I'm collaborating with people. Of course, there are many players, and little by little, you've learned to also work with people who don't necessarily understand your genre. But you have to work with them because they give you that opening. For example, you have a big show in a museum, and there's somebody who doesn't understand your work, but you have to work with them because, you navigate your way through. But the truth of the matter is, what's fascinating is like going from what Bappa said was that if you can show your work, and somebody like from Australia came and saw your work and took it forward, it's fascinating because the fact of the matter is that I've always believed in local growing global, and here's one story like she is and myself where we've done local work all our lives and yet we managed to sell globally. So the collaboration is really between people, So the humanity between human beings, I think it's something that you have to understand yourself better before getting into relationships.
Yeah. So, Bappa, do you really think that, what does really collaboration look like? Tell us, between a designer and a weaver, is it equal? Is there equality there?
Tough question. My journey has been a bit different because I came, although I studied textiles, then I went in, and when I saw looms being taken off and sold, when I wanted to work with a community, I realized first, initially we all face that they tell you no, it's not happening, it's not going to happen because it's not possible. Even I faced the same thing. But then I realized, introspected as to why they're saying no to me. And I realized that they're insecure in a way where they don't know my intentions, whether it is good or bad. And all the weavers, I'm talking about where I work, all the weavers, they're under some Mahajan, because they are the people who control the market and the products that are, because the weaver himself doesn't go and buy the yarn. The Mahajan buys the yarn, the Mahajan makes all the loom settings, the weaver just sits and weave and gets, whatever charges per day for weaving. So weaving for a new person like me, for him, meant that he had to stop work with his Mahajan. And so he wasn't sure whether I would stay in this line or not. So it was the question of my intentions. I realized that. So the moment I realized that, and because I was also trying to build my own brand, and I was totally new, I was starting from scratch. So in a way, I felt I was at their same level, because I had nothing with me. I started with 40,000 rupees. That's all the capital I had, because I had run away from my home and my father wouldn't support me. And So I was in their same level. So my journey would be different, but because I started with them and I realized, so I built a small room over there on my weaver's plot of land because I couldn't afford to buy a land. But I redid the room he had so I could go and stay over there. And that's when they started opening up. And that's, so my intervention, design intervention also became successful because I became a part of them. And I would sit with them on the loom, and as they were weaving, because as I told you that I never taught them new skills because I thought it was not required for me to do that because they were already so skilled in their own way. So I would sit with them on the loom. It's a long bench. So he would sit and weave, and I would sit side to him on the same bench. And as he was weaving, new ideas would come to me as to why don't we do this way? And he would first say no. So I said, but because I studied in NIF textiles, I knew logically, technical parts I knew. So I would technically tell him that this is possible. And then he couldn't say no. So then he tried, and then it was magic. And then for him, it was like, oh my God, why didn't we ever think about this? So, that led to who we are today. So my journey has been different, where it has been equal in a way. A lot of design interventions I can't claim are mine because it happened on the loom along with the weaver. So it's more collaborative, I would say. And because it was collaborative, probably it became so intrinsic. And probably why today so many copies are happening of our saris all over India is because it has become intrinsic part of the community.
How amazing is this that I can almost hear the music, of, when, the weave and when you're there. And because I've traveled a lot into Fulia in West Bengal, and just that sound is so meditative, So, when we talk about collaboration, tell me, Jahnavi, that, from your experience, what happens, when designers, tourism, craft, ecosystems actually work together? What happens? What's that magic? Or is there a lack of magic because everybody thinks that they know more than the other? And, there is tourism also that's included in all of this. Tell me from your personal experience.
From my perspective, because we were working with women, and it was not an organized setup at all. In Kaziranga, which is the heart of Assam, Upper Assam, Lower Assam, nobody wove in Kaziranga. When I put up my center next to my Diflu River Lodge, and I started with one of my first weavers who was actually abandoned by her husband. She needed a place. So my resort manager said, there's this place, we can take it on rent. So I started with her and this one lady, and she was supremely talented. And then I realized the other women from the village started coming around. They also wanted to learn. So we organically grew. And then our guest at Wildlife Lodge, at Diflu River Lodge, they wanted to come and see what was happening. So, and then the other tour operators also discovered, okay, there's an organized setup. Now it's a little larger under Lahe looms with active looms, to be able to see, appreciate the difference between the power loom and the power loom and the hand loom of Assam and the rest of the country. And that, the largest women-centric area in the region. So I think all that helped. It's a beautiful collaboration. And from there, we got a lot of textile lovers who are really also wildlife people who were staying at the lodge, saw what we do, came to the Weaver Center, invited me for London for the shows, and to display my craft, which I was also very busy with other things, so I wasn't paying too much attention to it. Now that I'm giving more time from my travel world, coming more into textiles, I have time for that. And there's been a beautiful collaboration all the way around. There's tourism, there's textiles, and there are people. And then the sustainable livelihood, which I've always talked about since when I was president FICCI Flow, we talked about sustainability, sustainable practices, sustainable livelihoods. And in the Northeast where we come from, it is tourism, it is handloom, both sustainable livelihoods for women.
So now we're going to do like a rapid fire, and you'll have to just refrain from giving very long answers, which is tough considering how passionate we all are. So let's just start with you. Okay, Bappa. Single sentence. One thing fashion needs to slow down immediately.
One thing?
Fashion needs to slow down immediately.
Really can't think of one line. this is a question more for him, I think.
Okay, so give it to me then.
Okay. One thing that fashion needs to slow down immediately.
I think the answer lies in your question itself. It's fast fashion that needs to slow down for real textile, for fashion and its real sensibility to come up. Because I think that one thing, what I wanted to also say, what Bappa also mentioned, was that there's a grey market to the whole story.
Yes.
And the grey market is sort of pushing fast fashion forwards, So that's one thing we have to stop.
One thing fashion must unlearn in the next 10 years.
I think the way it treats its makers.
One material you emotionally trust.
That would be the Eri silk and the Muga silk. That's it resonates the place you come from. It resonates the materials, and it is nature at its best.
Sonam, one rule you'd give the algorithm if you could. I know none of us are smart with the digital world. We all come from a generation where we're just learning and grappling. But
yeah, I think the deeper story, like we're discussing right now, is to bring in real textiles, handloom textiles, real people, and people who are genuinely doing interesting work, which can come into my algorithm instead of rubbish people trying to giving me lectures on yoga, health, and cooking. Which they cook so badly also.
So, for all of you, just the same question for all of you. If your clothes could talk, what would it say to their weavers? Yeah, if your clothes could talk, if your mikla could talk, what would it tell the weaver?
Say that we respect where this came from, and we would like this to continue the way it is. With your craft, be proud about where you come from, be proud about your skills, and take that forward always.
beautiful.
Never lose touch.
Beautiful. Bappa?
I think it would tell the weaver to adapt with the time.
Wonderful. Sonam?
I think gratitude, because the ultimate thing is, for the wearer, I think textiles, like you started, is a memory and its stories, no?
It is,
So, and the thing is
absolutely.
that it's about gratitude, because what it is, the textile of either today, of the old, or the future, they're carrying a story with you. Because when you wear it, it's emotionally entwined into your life. No?
Absolutely. And the last one, if clothes could talk, what would they, the future of fashion, let's just talk about that. Where and who does it belong to, if it were to belong?
That's a very hard question, because the younger people have very little space, time, and disdain for a lot of for our markets. We have older markets, so repeat the question.
But
The future
since you
of
said
fashion.
it is memory. It is memory. It would talk to the wearer. It belongs to the wearer finally.
So, Janabi, what about you? The future of fashion belongs to whom? Just finish the sentence, maybe.
Yeah, I think the world is now turning to sustainability, and our Gen Z are very intelligent. They appreciate that. If they are cognizant of the fact that this is impacting lives, these are natural fiber, they're not going to go into the landfill and pollute the earth further, they would be encouraged to wear that. Wear one or two quality products, wear it well.
I think I'd take this conversation a little forward. The future of fashion is interlinkages of culture, where we're not singularly only Indian, we're also part of Asia and the earth and the world, where the planet is suffering. For all of our works, it's not the boundaries don't exist. These sans frontières, like we say in French. And the truth of the matter, I think the future of fashion lies on how we treat the earth.
So now I'm going to just leave, the floor open to questions. If anybody has questions, we'd be very happy. Oh, great.
So what an interesting way to spend your Sunday. I am really thankful to all of you sharing your expertise. I come from the world of technology. I'd like to really know, how do you really, as people in the fashion really look at technology. Technology adoption, I would say, is more of forced right now, what I see in the fashion industry. People haven't really leveraged the power of technology, especially on the sustainability front. I can go on and on, but that's the question that I would
The
like
question
you
is
to
for
answer.
whom?
It could be to anyone.
Anyone.
and,
Whoever chooses to
one
answer.
more part to that question is that when we talk about fashion, we forget about that 20% of the fashion, the total fashion is also accessories. We just don't really pay any attention in India to the fashion accessories. 20% of the total fashion market is a huge market, which is completely untapped by Indian fashion industry.
I think when you're talking about technology, yes, I do appreciate that technology has not been used to its advantage fully. The way agriculture has used technology to its advantage, we fashion industry or textile industry has not used it. But saying that in the same breath, I would also like to add is what has happened to agriculture that has adopted technology. I mean, what we see, the green revolution, which we tom-tommed at that point in time, we are saying that wasn't that great. So now we are in a junction where we are questioning technology in a way in fashion, or I wouldn't know about fashion, but I would say about textiles, people whom we work with, when we are talking about sustainability, when we are talking about slow clothes movement, when we're talking about employment generation at the grassroots level, where we are trying to give more work to the hands. So how far technology can assist us in the production, I'm not sure, but technology can definitely assist us in marketing, like what he was saying, to go out globally, to reach out to more market. I think that's where technology can be used in a much more better way.
And to answer your second question about accessories, you're absolutely right. It makes 20%, you said, no? 20% of the entire thing. The fact of the matter is, accessories is something, again, the fact of the matter is that in the West, accessories are treated very differently than the way we treat them. Because an accessory is a status symbol, and whether it's a belt or it's a handbag or it's a pair or glasses, it sort of reflects a particular status that you come from. But yet at the same time, that when a fashion brand makes it, it's for the aspirational person. It's not for the design person. It's for the person who wants to reach a particular level and so wears it, So going forward, it's interesting because it's a whole class system which you are not aware of. Having lived in the West a lot, I've seen that it is a particular system that is we have still to grapple with. That's why fashion in India is slowly growing and coming into the global market. The next step, and with it simultaneously what's happening, is that definitely accessories is slowly working into the world market also.
To really in our Indian traditional system, accessories had been a part of this thing. If you really see the traditional dresses that we had the matching jewelry, the matching footwear, the matching stoles or the outer wear in terms of this thing. I mean, if you see it, especially in Punjab, if you really see, there are for everything you have the Patiala jutti, and you have headgear to match that, and you have a lot of things were there. We are not taking that to the international market. I mean, if we really take the entire thing, I think there is a lot more that can be really done.
Yeah, see, madam, the thing is relevant because, you have to see how a particular, you just take a shoe, for example, how relevant it is to that topography or the mountain or the sea. And it's the same way. So the thing is that one has to creatively find that relevance.
Yeah.
Where, for example, the Kolhapuri chappal, when Prada, no? Gucci.
Yes, Prada.
Used it for the show, it automatically became a rage internationally as well as locally. So when a creative designer or a design house can actually see the potential of something which is literally local and put it into an international global scenario, then it automatically gets picked up. So it's really catch-22, but that market is developing.
So there's a lot, I'm just going to answer this probably to an extent that there's a lot of divisions there, because when we talk about the Prada, they are the Chamars of India who are creating, doing leather work. And so there is a caste system also involved, it's a social structure in India. So there are so many layers, that we need to also overcome. And I think we are heading there, because there are amazing brands there is a brand out of Bombay called Chamar itself, who does work with recycled rubber. And they have had a huge market, I think, also internationally. So I think I'm very, very optimistic, and with amazing, people here who are artists from the world of fashion that I love. I love textiles. And I'm sure all of us do here. So it's been wonderful. Thank you, Alec Foundation, for curating such a thoughtful conversation and having such wonderful people on stage today. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
We take the opportunity to thank Mahua Chinnappa as well for the very interesting question, and she put it together for all of us.
Thank you, Jahnovi.
Before we close the session, may I request Mrs. Winnie Singh to come on stage and give away token of appreciation to the panelists.